Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Super from 2011. This is the second film that James Gunn has directed. It is kind of considered sort of, I guess, the film that helped him get Guardians of the Galaxy, or the movie he did before he made Guardians of the Galaxy. And you kind of wouldn't know it from watching this, to be honest. You wouldn't also know that it's his second film. It's a little surprising how much, like, budget-wise, this is the step down. Artistically, I wasn't sure if that was purposeful or just like what the only way he could make this movie, because I know he'd been trying for a long time to make this film. And then, although I think there's parts that really grab you in, and there are definitely, like, I think there's something interesting in here. He didn't craft that, but it feels dirtier and grimier, and you know he's like from Trauma and all this stuff, but you almost feel like that doesn't fully come around to be what I think he wants it to be, while also sort of making an interesting point about vigilantism and, you know, being a superhero in itself. Now, although I was making YouTube videos in 2011, believe it or not, I did not review this movie. So if you have actually been following me or subscribed since then and have been wanting for me to review Super all this time for 12 years, today is your lucky day. So if that is actually you, if there's anyone watching for that long, please, seriously, comment below. I will pin your comment, or the best of the people who are from that era. I remember some of those names, so if you are one of those people, I'm just actually curious at this point. I couldn't find any comments from that era saying, like, when are you going to review Super? But anyway, but I do remember people asking me about it, and I just never got around to it. I don't have a good reason, I guess. But yeah, the intro is from a 2011 review, but it is not from Super. I am also surprised when watching this and thinking of the era, because this is like right around when Hobo with a Shotgun came out. It's sort of the made-to-be B-movie kind of pipeline at the time, where it's like you'd come out, you'd hopefully do okay in theaters, and then you would come out on VOD and DVD and do well, because there was a DVD bubble at the time, which eventually burst, and that didn't work out. I think like this goes in line with like sort of the end of that era, where you had sort of more interesting movies. You didn't have like Snakes on a Plane or Drive Angry or those. Then you had the things like let's say this, with the Shotgun as well, which comes from, was a spin-off from Grindhouse, sort of. I even like the Machete films, frankly, and I think those fall into that. As well as, after this, God Bless America, which I think sort of does this movie better. I think God Bless America is a better version of this movie, basically. Or my memories of it from 10 years ago. That came out the following year, I believe. It is interesting to think of what James Gunn is now, because I'm seeing this in the context of, I haven't seen Guardians 3 yet, but he's running DC. He's going to be directing a Superman movie. And him and superheroes, I think, is interesting because most of his filmography is based on a comic book, except for like Slither. Slither is sort of the odd film out. And even watching, because I was, by my awesome patrons, selected, and you guys all voted on, because Slither was a winner of the Patreon movie review vote. I did review it recently, and it is interesting to look at that film and this film, because that film is so much better made, is a studio film, which this film really isn't. And it's also interesting to think, like, this is his only real non-studio film. He kind of has the vibe, a Trauma studio guy, and he definitely put in the years, and this was over 15 years since he had been making films professionally and stuff. But as a director, he really doesn't have that many things that weren't, you know, promoted and made with studio money, except for this. And it's interesting to think of what this film is versus those films. And sometimes while watching it, I was like, I think I like James Gunn, the studio director, more than the independent filmmaker, or at least in this case. Now, this is about a guy named Frank. Frank is a cook or whatever. He's married to, who's played by Rainn Wilson. He's married to a woman played by Liv Tyler. And she leaves him for like this drug kingpin played by Kevin Bacon, whose cronies are played by Sean Gunn and Michael Rooker. He leaves him for her, and she has addiction issues, and she's kind of stuck with a struggler, and he decides to become a superhero, or a vigilante called Crimson Bolt, decides to become a superhero and like fight crime with a wrench, and like often you see his misadventures in doing that and getting hit and attacked and not doing so well with it, even picking up a sidekick played by Elliot Page, who was a person working in a comic book store before, and kind of giving Rainn Wilson's character of Frank all the intel of what to do, so they can build up and eventually save his wife, or I guess soon to be ex-wife, from Kevin Bacon and his evil drug lord character. This film is really grimy, and I thought that was on purpose at first, and I was kind of giving this film the benefit of the doubt. And as it went on, I was like, I don't think this is like on purpose. Like, I think they just made it all shitty and stuff. And it's weird because, like, honestly, like thinking of this being like kind of a step down artistically in those terms, and it's weird to see someone go from a studio film to this. Like, if you were to just show these two films to someone, I think most people would think Super came first, and it doesn't, and that's weird. A lot of the things I thought at first, oh, is this like a genre thing? Like, he's commenting on genre, and it became pretty clear that, like, his use of, like, particularly, like, almost everyone involved in the drug trade is black at a certain point, other than Kevin Bacon and Michael Rooker and that crew. Like, it seems like anyone who is a drug dealer who we don't really need to get into their name or know them or everything is black in this film, including the big drug dealer guy. And that's, I don't think he's saying anything with that. I think that's like, I'm curious what that casting was about. It doesn't make me feel good about the casting. It feels like there's something really shitty going on there. And as well as, like, this film does use the F word and not the F word that's fun to say quite a bit, which for a film at its time, I sort of let go. But I have heard more complaints at the time of that going on with this. And I really, while I was watching it, for a lot of it, thought maybe this is on purpose, but I really think he felt like he could get away with this unless that he had a reason for doing it. And I think that's sort of like a lot of this film. Now, granted, I think the Crimson Bolt and like what he's doing, he plays as like a sad guy who thinks this will make a difference. And like, Crimson Bolt's life sucks, and he has to go out and like defend the honor of his ex-wife and do all these things. I don't know. He is very laughable in a lot of those things, but and it's like, oh, what a doofus and stuff. I think in some ways it gets into the deconstruction of a superhero and like why do people do these certain things and what good they can possibly do, or in theory, and how hard it is and what it would be like if someone decided to put on a superhero suit and actually fight in the real world and stuff like that. And I felt like it was sort of trying to do that, but then in the end it sort of just became like a superhero third act thing, but like with less budget and very R-rated. And I don't even get the R-rated thing. Like, everything I had heard about this film before I'd seen it was, oh, it's a superhero thing, but it's violent and it's messed up and stuff. And like, I get, like, I grew up reading a lot of comics, and anytime people were like, oh, this comic's really violent, when I was, 9 years old, I really wanted to read that comic. And my dad usually wouldn't let me. But when they first started doing those things in like the mid 80s and like, let's make, Batman more grittier and stuff like that, it's found very different and refreshing. And then when you think of, 2011, it's like, yeah, we've kind of done that. It's like not shocking anymore. And maybe you could say, oh, we haven't done that in film. I would argue, I think they had at that point. And I just don't think it's as refreshing and different. It just feels sort of like kind of stale. And a lot of this film feels like it's trying to do the indie movie kind of hip score, like, which I really don't like. I miss James Gunn's needle drops, especially in this. No really good needle drops, and it really hurts the film. It kind of makes me think, like, as much as I'm like, oh, it's like when I saw his Suicide Squad movie, it's like, oh, it's James Gunn being James Gunn. And this is like, oh, I kind of see him forming into the director and the auteur we know him to be, but like, he's not really there yet. And it's really shocking to see someone go from like a small, really grimy, gory superhero movie to Guardians of the Galaxy, which at this point is like one of the most mainstream things you can possibly think of. I think it took a different kind of voice to do that, obviously. I don't know. I like certain parts of this, and I like what it's trying to do, but I don't think it's really saying very much about what it's like being a superhero, or how silly it would be or something like that. I feel like it's too bogged down in this weird relationship between Rainn Wilson's character and Liv Tyler, and she's like always on drugs and drugged out and stuff. And also like the cast is almost like Kevin Bacon and Rainn Wilson and Elliot Page and Liv Tyler. Like these are all really big people, and you have to wonder like, why is this movie shot so shitty? Like, is this like a Saint Anger thing? Like, you guys are all like big movie stars and stuff like that, and I know a lot of them took scale to make like this weird different kind of film, but I don't know if I necessarily get it through their performances. It just feels like, I don't know, how people were not really sure what to do with indie movies then, and there was still a market of young people who would see stuff like that, so I think they thought it would up their cool point. I don't really know like what. It just feels like that feels very off. It is weird Kevin Bacon was in this the same year as X-Men First Class. Overall, it's like, it seemed like an interesting idea. It's like, this comes out a year after Kick-Ass, which I don't think did its job as well. It just like the whole like, let's mess with superhero things and wouldn't it be more violent and stuff like that. It just really doesn't feel as interesting an idea as I think a lot of these filmmakers do, and I don't think they make me change my mind whatsoever. So I'm just stuck with the thing like, well, isn't this messed up? And I'm like, yeah, I guess. I don't know. It's like the Nathan Fillion Christ thing was cool. Like Rob Zombie being the voice of God is kind of funny. Things of that nature. But I don't think like the sum of all of this really makes a lot of sense. Like, it just doesn't really, like, what was the point of him doing this? It almost feels like he doesn't, the difference between this and like, Star-Lord or in his other films, like he has like a real arc and a point to that arc, and the point to this arc is like he's just like what he inspires and like what it brings to the community and stuff like that. And I feel like the thing in the end of the first Guardians is it's like, yes, they did something for that planet and the community of space or whatever, but it's more like that conclusion is more about like, well, are these people actually good people? Like, can they be redeemable despite being like space raiders and like pirates and stuff like that? And that conclusion doesn't really, I mean, like, I'm sure if you lived on that planet, that was pretty cool, but like, it mattered more to those characters, and I think that's why those characters, we become so attached to them. Whereas this guy, it's like, oh yeah, he saved his weird ex-wife there. That's neat. And it felt like what was he to overcome? Because even in the end, they kind of like peter off at like, oh, this inspired all this stuff and things. And I'm like, I guess the inspiration Batman thing means something. But like, I can relate to showing someone like finally conquering that maybe, you're okay in the end, rather than showing like, look at everything you've inspired. And that doesn't feel maybe as natural of a human emotion. Also, I think it wasn't portrayed very well. Rainn Wilson's pretty good in this. I like Elliot Page actually. Playing against type at the time, not being very like the nerdy know-it-all kind of person, more being like this crazy comic book fan. I do think Rainn Wilson, a weird combo with him, because he would try to do cult stuff like The Rocker and other stuff, and I don't know if his filmography really, or he never really became a movie star, but this is when they were trying with him, and I do think he's doing a kind of off weird performance, and of the people who are, his work's the best, is where I think like Kevin Bacon's being too broad. I think Liv Tyler, I don't know what, she's just asleep the whole time. Michael Rooker's kind of there, and same as Sean Gunn. I think if you are into James Gunn and you want to see like how this filmography formed, you honestly can probably sort of skip this in a certain regard, but I'd also say this is an interesting step. And it's also interesting to think like so much of his filmography is superheroes. He's more a superhero director than a horror director at this point. He's like, if you count this, the 3 Guardians and Suicide Squad, that's there's only one that's not a superhero movie. And like to see him like sort of questioning it, I don't know, I think he works better as a studio director who comes to this simple, distinct point. And I don't think he knew how to make up that point. Like, I don't think he had a statement. I think his statement was, isn't it crazy this guy's hitting people with a wrench and there's like blood and like he's stabbing people and he's like crazy. And it's like, yeah, but why did you try to act like there was a message that's more than that? And, I think that was kind of a problem with these movies, is they tried to accomplish way more than they ever should. And this just doesn't it really should have just been a guy hitting people with a wrench. I think when left with just guy hitting people with wrench, you have to lean into it and beat their head in and let the blood go everywhere and not think about how maybe the blood represents something. I don't really give a fuck. I want to see a guy hit somebody with a wrench, and maybe, don't pontificate about, what this means to the guy down the street. Seeing that and how he's inspired. Nobody fucking cares. They just want to see a guy hit someone in the head with a fucking wrench. So if you have seen Super and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.